The historicity of the Exodus is like this. Imagine you and I are standing in front of a grand mosaic portrait. And this mosaic portrait is made up of smaller portraits, 100 smaller portraits. And these 100 smaller portraits are roughly divided in thirds. About a third of these 100 smaller portraits are portraits of Abraham Lincoln. And about a third of these smaller portraits are portraits of Benjamin Walker, the actor who played Abraham Lincoln in the mostly fictional Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And then imagine the last third of these smaller portraits are portraits of Bill Pullman, who played President Whitmore in the seminal, but unfortunately fortunately entirely fictional Independence Day. Now imagine all these smaller portraits are assembled in such a way to form this grand mosaic of Homer Simpson. And now you gesture to this grand mosaic and you ask me, because I'm the scholar, is that guy real? Well, what am I going to say? No, that's a fictional character. No, Homer Simpson does not really exist. No, the biblical Exodus, the Exodus as it's described in the Bible, it didn't happen. It's entirely fictional. Right? Now, what YouTube apologists do is they smash their faces against, in order to make these hour-long videos about all the evidence for the Exodus, they smash their faces against this mosaic portrait, and they focus razor sharp on the tiny portraits of Abraham Lincoln. They say, oh, see, evidence for the Homer Simpson, evidence for the biblical Exodus. Abraham Lincoln really existed. And then they'll either ignore or they'll dismiss the portraits of Bill Pullman, entirely fictional, and then they'll try and spin the portraits of Benjamin Walker to make them seem less fictional than they actually are. Well, maybe there weren't vampires, but Abraham Lincoln did throw hands with evil forces, and that's kind of the same thing once we account for hyperbole or something like that, right? They'll try and spin that so it seems as historical as possible. And they will infer from the real, genuine historicity of Abraham Lincoln and the actual historical parts, all two of them, of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and they will look at the big portrait, the mosaic of Homer Simpson. They'll be like, that dude really existed. And that's simply not a luxury that biblical scholars have. I have to be more honest and more direct than that. Homer Simpson did not and does not exist. The biblical Exodus does not happen. If you were to remove all the fictional parts of that mosaic, right, Homer Simpson would be gone, the portraits of Bill Pullman would be gone, the portraits of, at least most of the pictures of Benjamin Walker and Abraham Lincoln, all that would be left would be a series of disconnected, smaller portraits of Abraham Lincoln. And that's what we have with the Exodus. If you remove all the fictional bits of the biblical narrative, you do have some disconnected historical tidbits left over, right? It is surprisingly, but it is a genuine historical fact, for example, so far as we can tell, that a large group of Semitic-speaking people migrated down to Egypt, rose to positions of high authority, ruled over the country for a couple generations, and then were forcefully expelled in mass, whereupon they seem to have resettled in parts of Canaan. And in fact, Egypt went so far as to create this theological rhetoric and say that those people that they expelled worship this evil, foreign, desert storm deity. It's a fact, so far as we can tell, that there were Semitic-speaking slaves. It's a fact, so far as we can tell, that slaves built storehouse cities like Pithom and Ramses. It's a fact that occasionally they had to build them without all the best materials, as is described in Exodus 1. It's a fact that sometimes slaves occasionally escaped. It's a fact that Egypt built structures that looked vaguely like the tabernacle. It's a fact that Egypt had cultic objects that looked a little bit like the Ark of the Covenant. It's even a fact that, especially between the 15th and 13th centuries BCE, that Egypt seems to be experimenting on occasion with different kinds of monolatry, the worship of only single deities to the exclusion or to the disrespect of all others. All that stuff appears to be facts. Now, all those facts are separated by 100 years, 200 years, 300 years or more. It's even a fact that, I mean, in the 17th century, Santorini erupted, right, and darkened the skies and perhaps reddened the waters as far away as the Nile Delta. But that's hundreds of years and it isn't supernatural. And right, so there are all these disconnected historical tidbits. And if you connect those historical tidbits with a bunch of fictional and legendary narratives, yeah, you can get yourself to a portrait of Homer Simpson. You can get yourself to the story of the biblical Exodus. But you can't just infer that because some of the elements of the story are abstractly and disconnectedly true, that therefore the mosaic that they've been used to craft is also true. Right? That'd be like saying that Robin Hood must be real because there are in fact forests and there were in fact crusades and there is in fact the English longbow and there were kings and ergo Robin Hood. Like you can't do that just because some of the elements of the story, or even better, like imagine somebody writes a story where like Nazis fight the Ottoman Empire that's fighting crusaders from 12th century France. And then somebody's like, hey, all those things are real. There were Nazis, there was an Ottoman Empire, there were crusaders, ergo the story is real. It's like, no, those are separated by centuries of time. Right? That's the situation that we have with the Exodus.